Mulisema ni watu wa mtego ama mulisema ni watu wa jubilee?
I wish to declare Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta as president-elect.
Hata kama nafanya hapa na Raila tangaze anataka watu town, dakika hiyo nafunga.
Woka haha na bese yoralia ne bese siagereirwo no gutwarira ando elgeo marakweti damu bilioni 3.
Kenyans will one day really marvel at what really happened in this Kimware and Aror Dam.
The first term of Kenya's Jubilee government was one seen to be of political harmony between two of the country's most powerful politicians, President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy, William Ruto. There was, at least publicly, the perception that both politicians were singing from the same hymn sheet on all matters, from politics to the economy.
There was no clear center of control. Yeah, I think I saw more like a dichotomized system.
When Kenya's 2017 election was done with, the alliances that brought Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto together seemed intact. But a Supreme Court ruling, a second election that was boycotted by the opposition, and mounting tensions and violence set both the country and this alliance on edge. What bearing this would have on the management of Kenya's economy too would soon unfold.
God bless. Thank you.
This coming together of two political competitors changed the trajectory of Kenya's politics, being the first nail in the coffin of President Kenyatta's and his deputy's alliance. Nearly everything that the two did was analyzed from a political point of view. But there were deeper motives for some pronouncements.
There will be no new projects started until the projects that are currently ongoing in your various ministries, departments, sagas, universities are completed.
Meanwhile, in Western Kenya, Deputy President William Ruto continued his developmental tours.
Munajua ni nani wa kufanya kazi, ni nani wa kupiga mdomo.
Putting a freeze on new projects may have seemed like a move to manage the country's development agenda well, but the truth was in Kenya's loan book. The country's debts were steadily climbing to levels that would not be sustainable. The country's budget deficit, or the amount of additional money it needs to finance its budget, had more than doubled, from 329.7 billion shillings in 2013 to 2014 to 690 billion shillings in 2016 to 2017. So the government's proposal to deal with this was to do away with the tradition of pegging Kenya's debt to its gross domestic product and introduce a debt ceiling. The ceiling is usually around 50% of the revenue generated by the country.
At the time that you were the chair of the committee, the debt ceiling was raised. What was the justification? What was your pushback? Why didn't the committee stop this kind of profligacy when it came to government spending?
I chaired that meeting in the chamber. I remember it was in the main chamber of Parliament. And our position as a Budget and Appropriations Committee then was that we increase debt from 5 to 7.5 up to June of 2022. But it was a view of the Treasury that 9 trillion up to June 2022. And we held that very strong position, that 7.5. And why we were pushing for 7.5 is that we could see the appetite that government had for borrowing was too high. And if you gave them a huge blank check, they would exhaust it even before the end of June 2022. In fact, I think there was even a proposal to push it to June 2024. But then, again, through fiat and the usual way of doing things then, the 9 trillion shillings was forced on the nation.
If his and the hands of other parliamentarians were forced on this issue, then Kimani Ichung'wah made a sterling performance of his hiding this fact when the proposal to raise the debt ceiling was being debated and passed.
Members of Parliament have approved a request by the National Treasury to raise the public debt ceiling to 9 trillion shillings.
We are at 5.8 today, but we look at the 4 key agenda, we will look at the key projects, and some of these projects, Mr. Speaker, are historical.
We are not telling the government to go and borrow 9 trillion. In fact, when we had a meeting with the Treasury, we were very clear with the Treasury that this 9 trillion should take Kenyans to 2024 at least, without asking us again to change the debt ceiling.
Yes, the economy is bad, but the economy is not bad because we are borrowing or because we have exceeded the debt ceiling today. The economy is bad, Honorable Speaker, because there is no liquidity in the economy, because government is not spending.
By 2019, when the debt ceiling of 9 trillion shillings was passed, even dyed-in-the-wool supporters of the Jubilee regime were changing teams.
On behalf of the Budget Committee, I want to offer my unqualified apology to the people of this nation, because as the people they trusted on the ballot, we have failed them by telling them lies.
I think parliamentary leadership didn't do too well. Now, this is much later in the day, but I think in 2018, one member of parliament, 2018, one member of parliament who's now a cabinet secretary for industry and trade,
Moses Kuria.
Yes, specifically brought a motion in parliament asking for parliament to form a committee whose work would be basically public debt management, because it was clear signals were there. Now that motion was not even debated because the speaker at that time, who is now the Attorney General, made the decision that that was not necessary, that action, that same, the same objectives for that committee would be pursued by the budget committees, no, finance committees. And Parliament just accepted it. Which in my view is a question of a speaker being partisan and choosing and actually managing Parliament in the way it wishes to have oversight functions against the executive. That was a huge opportunity lost, in my view.
You know, Parliament was not acting on the interest of our interest.
Yeah.
They were acting on instructions.
I did apologize to the country that there are things that we were told to do that we should never have done.
Raising the debt ceiling was a symptom of the government's much deeper debt addiction that began in 2013. But it wasn't just the debt that was beginning to look suspicious. Some of the projects that were being funded also didn't smell right. The Kimwarer and Aurora Dam projects were first conceived in the Kibaki regime, but were not revived until 2014. The construction of the dams was under the Kerio Valley Development Authority, part of a broader project to also construct a hydropower facility, develop 2,000 hectares of land under irrigation, and develop industrial and domestic water supply for 500,000 residents of the area. This was the first and only invitation to tender for their construction of this multi-purpose project. A few key words are important to note here. Highlighted in red is the request for funding, design, build and transfer for both dams. This meant that whoever won the tender would need to raise the money required to complete the project themselves. Kenya's government, as per this document, would not need to seek a loan facility or raise the funds itself. An Italian firm with offices in Johannesburg, South Africa, CMC de Ravina, eventually won this tender. The award letter from former KVDA MD David Kimosop emphasizes the same. A look at the eventual winner of this tender, Italian firm CMC de Ravina's financial proposal, shared with the KVDA in 2015, and the same is repeated: finance, design, and construct. The tender document is the first of many that were presented in court when the scandal was picked up by Kenya's Directorate of Public Prosecutions. The rest make for even more interesting reading. We asked this man to help us identify yet more red flags from these documents.
Okay, my name is Bernard Moshere. I was working as an internal auditor in the Treasury for almost 40 years.
Moshere was the auditor who exposed a corruption scandal involving a tender to supply portable clinics to vulnerable communities across Kenya, known locally as the Afya House scandal. After De Ravina won the tender, they were given a few months to proceed with the tender.
There was some memorandum of understanding that within 8 months, if they have not signed any contract, the whole deal expires. But in 2017, that was almost 1.5 years later, a contract agreement was signed, a joint venture with the KVDA. The whole contract changed. Apart from the tender number, the conditions which were in the tender document were forgone. What happens is that the CMC did have a 19, which is a completely different company than the one which was awarded. The contract agreement was not supported by any contract documents.
Remember that the tender had specified that the winner would, by themselves, finance, build, operate, and transfer the project to the KVDA? Well, the contract signed in 2017 indicated that the government of Kenya would source the funds for the project. Somehow, with no paper trail or public explanation, Kenya went from engaging in a build and transfer contract where the contractor would find the money to paying for the project itself.
There was a loan, 2 loans, one for Kimara and the other for Alor. Buyer credit facilities for financing Italian goods and services. When you look at that loan and the contract, there is no correlation.
How this project went from being financed by the contractor to being financed by the Kenya government has never been explained. Even an opinion given by the then Attorney General doesn't seem to recognize the fact that the contract being executed was under different terms than the tender advertisement and the specifications therein.
That's the typical way in which debt has been stolen, essentially.
Yes. The issue is this, and that's why I say, if we are to clean our debt register, those are one of the things we must look at. What was this debt for? What was the contract? Was it a PPP? If it was a PPP, the Kenyan government can never be a borrower.
Nonetheless, the government began making arrangements to pay out monies to the contractor, beginning with a 52 million euro payment for insurance, an incredibly high sum even for a project of this scope. This is the payout that Deputy President William Ruto spoke of while defending the contract.
Ile pesa imelipwa ni bilioni 7. Na hiyo pesa bilioni 7 ambayo imelipwa haijapotea kwa sababu tuko na mpango ya sawasawa.
You have already committed your resources, even that money for insurance, 7 billion shillings, and it is to secure this loan. You have financing, ready financing. And there's nothing opaque with the Italian engagement with the Kenyan government.
That's the thing about Kimwarere and Aror. It started out as a PPP, meaning that the government didn't have to finance anything. When it became a loan is the question. And that's something that we're still not able to establish.
Was Kimwarere to be a PPP, really? I'm not aware whether it itself was a PPP.
It would appear that the real crime may have been hiding in plain sight all along.
Kenyans will one day really marvel at what really happened in this Kimwarere and Aror Dam.
In March of 2023, President Ruto kept his word that the Kimwarere and Aror project would not die. While hosting Italy's Prime Minister, he made this announcement.
We've also committed, in good faith, to re-establish cooperation on the construction of Aror Kimwarer.
In the next episode, we go further into the bones of this deal and the storm that nobody could have predicted was coming that made things even more complex for Kenya.